Hello and welcome to Laoghaire-Rathdown Library's series of events celebrating Dublin, one city, one book. 7 months on from the original schedule dates back in April this year, but better late than never, and we all know the reason for the delay. It's a pleasure to present these events to you at this point in any case. Tonight is the final event in this series. I'm Martina Devlin. I'll be your host. We do hope you've enjoyed the earlier ones. Check back and you'll find them online. Our topic this evening is Dublin as a literary location, and I'm joined by the one and only Christine Dwyer Hickey. Hello, Christine.
Hi, Martina. How are you?
Christine is the author of 8 novels and a short story collection. The novels range from The Cold Eye of Heaven and Last Train from Liguria to The Narrow Land, which is set in Cape Cod in 1950 and imagines an unlikely friendship between the artist Edward Hopper, his wife Jo, and a 10-year-old German refugee. It won the Sir Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction earlier this year and the inaugural Dublin Literary Award for Novel of the Year. Christine is also the author of a memorable novel, Tatty, the 2020 Dublin One City, One Book choice. So, Christine, you're coming to the end of your events for One City, One Book. How does that feel?
That's right. Well, it probably feels a lot different, I think, than it probably would have felt had we not had a certain pandemic going on. We were expecting to do an awful lot more events, live events that would take me to a lot of different countries and venues around city and around the city of Dublin and elsewhere. But anyway, that wasn't to be. So I managed
we
to
get we get to see inside your house instead, though, don't we? This is about place, and I'm seeing that we actually can see the place where you work.
You can actually. Sometimes I work here, and sometimes I work in a little room upstairs, a little dark room, and I need to focus. When I need to broaden things out, I come out to this room because it's bright, and when I need to narrow things in a bit, I go upstairs. Yeah.
And this is legalized snooping, isn't it? I'm looking at the photographs.
Oh yeah, there's a big picture up there behind. You want to see it? You can't see it now.
Yeah.
Yes, look at her. Isn't she splendid?
That's a statuesque woman.
She sure is. She didn't care about the banana bread during lockdown. I always say she's a girl who doesn't mind being herself. And she's great. She's magnificent. So, anyway.
And what are all the little black and white photographs under her? Are they family shots or are they...
I actually forgot that they were there. This is my baby elephant. I own this baby elephant. You probably can't see it. This is my baby elephant here. Cersei is her name, and she's in Kenya.
You sponsor her?
I
sponsor her? Okay.
Yeah. So actually, she was given to me as a gift from a very good friend who was in Kenya at the time. And this is Mr. Joyce in Zurich, Mr. Dickens.
I recognise.
That's the story. A postcard from Mary Keane, the late Mary Keane, in Listowel. And that's a bookshop in Gotham Books in New York with a few writers that I like. And that's one of me and Dennis going off to do at some stage. But anyway, I forgot they were there, otherwise I would have taken them down.
Oh, I'm glad you didn't. Do you look at things like this all around you on your desk and on the wall, and do they have an impact on your work, or do they just make you feel safe enough to work?
I don't know. Sometimes I do have some things that people gave me over the years that I put, like, I don't know whether this is any kind of whether I should be delighted with this or not, but people tend to give me gifts of owls. I have a huge owl collection. With they think I need a bit of wisdom, but I have a lot of owls. Yeah, a lot of owls all over the place. So they're all over here. I have owls, and it's like a zoo in here with different animals that, they're things that the kids brought or that my husband brought or whatever. They just arrived. But look, I wouldn't judge my desk, Martina. When I'm finished a book, the things I have found on this desk, you would not believe under all the papers. You know, I've told the story before, but one time I found €20 note and a snail another time. And another time I found a corner of a sandwich gone mouldy. You know, that's how disgraceful I am. And I'm quite housebound my own way, but I just lose all sense of civilization when I come to a certain part in a novel. So anyway, that's my confession.
But, you know, it's the place where you work. It's the place where stuff goes on. And I suppose I fixed on all your little mementos because I surround myself with little bits and pieces. I mean, I'm just actually looking around. Oh, here, look, here's something I've got on my desk. Can you see that? It's a Sheila na gig.
No. Oh, right. Very good. I can't see it, though. You're gone.
It's
I can only see me.
I find myself inspired by these things, so I thought perhaps you were too, by Joyce and Dickens and Mary Keane, JB's wife.
Over there, I have the two framed photographs of one of James Joyce and Sylvia Beach, and one of the jockey Tony McCoy in the middle of it. All courageous people. So they're on that wall. And Miles Davis is over there. All of courage, and she's plenty of courage up here. This one, yeah. So anyway, that's my little surrounding.
Yeah. Oh, here, look. Here's another. I have a little. Can you see that? It's a little witch.
I have a lot of those too. They're not. That's very good.
Yeah,
my birthday is on the 6th of January, which in Italy is the feast of the Befana, or the witch. And people go around and there's witches that go around the town and they give sweets out to the children and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, my husband doesn't think it's any coincidence that I was born on the feast day of the witches, by the way, he says. But anyway, I have a lot of them. I have them, you know, he buys me one every year, a different one. They sell them. So I have a lot of witches. Not in here, though.
So listen, Christine, this is about place. And Dublin, of course, is a character in its own right in many of your books.
Yeah.
You're a Dubliner.
Yeah. I am a Dubliner, and I'm also my third generation on both sides, I think. It's unusual anyway. Most people have their parents are from the country or their grandparents are from the country. There's a Wicklow connection, but mostly Dublin, I think. But anyway, I was looking at the One City, One Book, which generally speaking is books that are set in Dublin. And if you look at a lot of them now, apart from the wonderful collection of short stories, the Laoghaire-Rathdown, because they've varied. There's so many writers involved in that, all women writers. They varied locations. But I think a lot of them, like I was looking, I made a list of them. Echoland by Joe Joyce, Fallen by Liam Mills, Strumpet City, Dubliners, Ghostlight, A Long, Long Way Back, Sebastian Barry, At Swim to Birds, Flann O'Brien, and they're all set in the past. Isn't that kind of funny?
Oh, I hadn't realised that connection.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Dublin's very old. Yeah, I have that too. We'll have a Ghostlight moment. Woo. Yeah. Cheers.
Oh, anyway, and a sign.
Oh, I have that too now. I hope. Oh, yes. Oh, I don't get love. I only get best wishes and admiration. Oh, no, I do. I have love at the end. But anyway.
I'm sure we all get love.
Yeah, sure we all get love. They all seem to be, I think Dublin lends itself very well as a literary location, particularly in the past. It's only really started the big changes in Dublin have only started to occur, I think, in the last 20, 25 years or so. You know, when you think of it, the docks all around the docklands, they were the same, and they would have been the same when I was a kid, and up to about 20 years ago, was it 15 years ago, when they built the conference centre and all that glass that sea of glass that's down overlooking the quays now. It would have been the same in my grandmother's time, in the time of James Joyce, the time of Flann O'Brien moving up. For years and years, it was the exact same. And then suddenly it stopped. And now we're a much more modern city. There's still pockets. I think it's a city, it's a town, really, that thinks it's a city. But it's very,
no, that's Derek.
It lends itself brilliantly to the coincidence. And coincidences are always really handy things to have in a novel, And I don't know, many times I'd go into town, I'd see somebody from the top of a bus, and then I'd meet them later that night at the other side of town or something. Like, you're always seeing people who see people, and here you can even hear. Sometimes you'll overhear something. Two strangers talking about somebody you know. Like, it's that kind of city. And that's all wonderful. That's all great fodder for a novel. Particularly.
I thought you were about too many coincidences in a novel. I remember being told you can only have one coincidence per novel. And I was like, I need two. I need two for this plot.
I don't agree with that. It just depends on how it's done. I mean, look, even to come out of Dublin for a while, you think of Jane Austen, when, they'd go down to they'd stay in Bath and they'd meet some people here. And then she's suddenly going on a walk somewhere miles and miles away and she bumps into somebody else. And if that didn't happen, how would you get the novel, And in those days, they had to rely on horses and carriages. So, you have to have a certain amount of coincidence. But anyway, in Dublin, as I said, you'll keep bumping into people. Or you'll see somebody, or Ulysses is made up of that coincidence.
So it's interesting you could say it lends itself to historical novels because of the architecture. I
don't know. I think the streets are very, a lot of the streets anyway, you have a broad street and then it narrows, like the song "and streets broad and narrow," and then it narrows in, and then you have little areas and the public house, the pub, of course, and the cafes and things like that. And even the sky sometimes seems to cower down, and I just think it's just a very manageable stage on which to place your novel and to make it move. It can move as well. No, I think it's pretty good.
And sorry, go on.
Well, I'm just thinking, one of the books that's not a One City, One Book, but it's one of my favourite ones that really, really uses Dublin. And from the rooftops, from the secret rivers underneath, is Roddy Doyle's Star Called Henry. I think that's really, really good. Right? That really uses Dublin very well. And it uses every inch of it. It seems to use every inch of it. And I found it quite inspiring, actually.
Of course, Ulysses, it was said, you could find your way around the city by reading the novel. Joyce was so exact about his streets and his locations.
Yeah, he was very exact. Now that's becoming probably less and less likely as years go by and shops close down. And, on Bloomsday this year, the T.S. Eliot Fund gave a gift to Sweeney's or Sweeney's. There's arguments about how to pronounce it. The chemist that features in where Bloom goes in to buy a piece of lemon soap on Lincoln Place. And I was asked to say a few words, and it just got me thinking about there's so few shops now. There's small premises now that are still in Ulysses. There's J.V. Burns and there's Sweeney's in that area. Okay, Trinity is there and Hollis Street is there. But they're big institutions, but small little shops. They're less and less. They're getting less and less. The Ormond Hotel is gone. There's a lot of places gone. We don't hold on to places, say, like the way the Italians do. But even so, and there's also something about the Dublin people and the slightly sour sense of humour, I think, and the gossip that goes on that all helps in the building of a novel. It all works.
Do you think the Dublin personality is different to the Irish personality? Would you separate it out that way?
I think most capital cities are different, or most big cities. It doesn't necessarily be the capital, but there will always be a city. Like in the States, New York is very different, isn't it, to the rest of the States. And Dublin is, I think. When there's a lot of us together, facing someone who's not Irish, then we're all Irish. But the Dublin and the country thing is very, very still there. It's still, it's sort of good humoured most of the time, but it's definitely still there. It's definitely still there. Yeah.
So you've used Dublin as a setting quite often in your work, in the Dublin Trilogy, for example. And Christine, I have to say, it's pretty swanky to have a trilogy. You've used it in The Cold Eye of Heaven.
Yeah.
You've used it in the short stories.
Yeah. I've used it in Tatty.
You keep coming back to it. Yeah, Tatty.
Yeah. It was after I wrote the short, was it the short stories? I can't remember, but when I felt I was starting to be sort of tagged as a Dublin writer, I get uncomfortable when there's any labels attached to me. So I wanted to pull them off and go elsewhere. So then I went to Italy. And then I came back and did the Cold Eye of Heaven. And then I went off again. And, and then I did The Narrow Land, which is set in Cape Cod. So it changes. But yeah, quintessentially, I'd say I'm a Dublin writer who changes now and then, who goes away now and then, but always comes back. But of course, we're not the only one. There's plenty of others who do it too.
Mm-hmm. So it continues to inspire.
It does, I think. It depends. I mean, The Cold Eye of Heaven is probably my most Dublin one in that it is also episodic, but it goes backwards. So we meet the character Farley when he's 75 years of age, and every chapter he gets 10 years younger. But so does Dublin. He works as a sort of a summon server and in a one of those legal agencies that supports the legal the legal offices like barristers and solicitors and all that kind of thing. And he knows the city inside out, and he was born in Dublin. And now when we meet him, it's very likely, and he's going to die. He's just about to die. We meet him when he's dying. We meet him at the end of the story, but it goes backwards. But so does the city. The city is just changes in every single chapter, the same as he does, and different things happen that happened at that time. But the city, the structure of the city, and the only thing that really stays steady is the Liffey. But even that has bridges that change, and the banks change, and so that to me, it was a very much city was a character in that more than any other book I've written anyway.
Yeah, it was an intriguing way to approach a story, reverse chronology, as you say. Farley's, we meet him as an old man, he's dying.
It's a nice way of doing it. I wish I could do. It's a very nice way of doing it. Once I got to that stage where we met him, we knew the first chapter, we knew he was kind of, more or less probably finished. We got to know him a little bit as he lay on the bathroom floor of his house in Ballyfermot with his nose pressed up against the toilet, waiting, hoping that the Polish girl who lived next door might, hear him if he starts shouting when he hears her going to work. And then the next chapter was the day before, when he's going to get a suit cleaned for a funeral. We're not sure whose funeral it is. And once I got to that took me ages to get to that stage, the end of that chapter. And then I thought, Christ, what am I going to do now? And I thought, I keep going backwards. And once I made
you didn't intend?
No.
You didn't intend it?
No. No. I finished the first chapter, and then I said, what will I do? Okay, you mention a suit at the end of the first chapter. So let's go and look at that. It's what, I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Yates, the American writer. He's a favourite writer of mine, but he calls it the correlative object. So it's some little thing that just keeps, it's an object that will keep, being relevant. So I thought, well, I'll take the suit and use that as the correlative object. And so he collected a suit. So where was the suit? Or was he leaving it in? He was talking about, when he's lying on the ground, he's talking about the suit. So then I said, what's the story with the suit? Okay, it's a funeral. You mentioned that. So let's go back to when he's getting the suit and he's getting the sole of his shoe. He's thinking, will he go up to the altar at this funeral? And if he goes to the altar, he's a hole in his suit, the sole of his good shoes. So he better get that mended. So I thought I'd use those to get me into the second chapter. And then I got to the second chapter, and I was about to the last page of it. Sometimes you leave things to the gods and you're thinking, what am I going to do next? So don't think about it. And then I thought, I'll go back again. So I went back 10 years. Once I was back 10 years then, I thought, well, all I've got to do is find out what day is it today. So say if that day was, and I can't remember offhand, but say if that day was the 12th of February, when I was ready to start chapter 3, I said to myself, so in the novel, this would have to be the 12th of February, 2000. So what happened that day? So I just looked up the newspapers, what happened that day, and I put them into it, and we worked from there. We got on very well. Thank you very much. After I did that, So
Sarah Waters did that in The Night Watch. I don't know if you ever read that book. Sarah Waters, The Night Watch, had that idea of a story going backwards.
Yeah. Some people do it. They do it. Sometimes they do it. Martin Amis does it kind of literally, and I remember reading Times Now and thinking to myself, I bet you he was rewinding something on the video when he got that idea. So they literally go backwards, So I didn't do that quite that way. The story goes forward even though it goes backwards because you learn more about it. I like playing with time.
What is it about some cities, Dublin, for example, Venice, New York, London, that they lend themselves to fiction?
Yeah. I don't know. Again, I mean, London, then Paris is sort of the same. Paris sort of seems to be a particular type of novel, isn't it? It's sort of, if you think of I'm trying to think of the Parisian ones. Dublin is still different to them. London is the same. It's a wider story, although they're made up of little neighbourhoods more than we are, I think. Dublin maybe would be one big neighbourhood, whereas Paris has the arrondissement. Each one is different. Venice,
Elizabeth
like
Bowen, The House in Paris. Elizabeth Bowen, The House in Paris.
Right. Elizabeth Bowen, The House in Paris. Lovely book. And she uses Paris very well in that book, but she doesn't stay in Paris the whole time, does she?
No.
As far as I recall, a lot of them don't stay. Even some of these one city, one books, they go away and they come back. They do go away, like somewhere else. London, it's wider, but it's the neighbourhoods are there. Ghost Light goes from Dublin to London. They change, but there's not that many that stay within one the whole time. And it tends to be generalising now. You're thinking people like Martin Amis, people who know the city very well. Charles Dickens know the city very well, so they can encompass it, I think. But it's usually a little area.
Do you find yourself going and visiting particular locations in the city then and being inspired by them? Because we talk about writing about Dublin, but sometimes it's specific parts of Dublin.
Yeah.
Like
sometimes
the North Inner City.
If I read, sometimes I can read in a novel that I think you get the sense that maybe the person doesn't know that part of the city as well.
Yeah.
They ought to. They just liked the sound of it or something, but they didn't actually get to explore it enough. From my point of view with Dublin, Martina, is that I know Dublin very well simply because of my father, because I used to go everywhere with him, and he was somebody who would go to several pubs in one day and all the race courses, and and he lived in the Ormond Hotel before he got married for 8 years. So he used to go back to visit those people. And in those days, of course, it meant a different thing to live in a hotel than it does now. So I got to know the city very well, as a child. And then when I was a teenager, I was moved. My school was moved. I had been in a small boarding school, and then I was put into a bigger school in Terranure, and I was very unhappy there. And I took to Mitching on my own, which involved a lot of wandering around the city as well. And I got to know different parts of Dublin. And my parents are from two different sides of Dublin. My father was being from the Liberties originally, and my mother was from Clonafroid and Drumcondra, and a lot of her sisters lived around there. So I would be going, I would stay with one aunt and be sent down a message to the other aunt, and I would learn all those little streets around the red brick Drumcondra area and walk into town. And so I got to know Dublin really, really well. And when my parents got married, if you met on O'Connell Bridge, and if you weren't able to walk at 5 o'clock and you weren't home in time for your tea, you were deemed a culchie. That was the end of that. You weren't from Dublin. You weren't from real Dublin. So, so that's the way it used to be. But anyway, so I got to know Dublin. So why not use what you know sometimes,
Sure.
Yeah,
and Joe Joyce's Echoland. Joe Joyce's Echoland, which is a previous One City, One Book choice, is it's when I read that, I thought, I could find my way around Dublin based on this. The streets. He was very exact about it, but he also had a little factoid that somebody who couldn't afford an engagement ring in Weirs might be better going down to the Happy Ring House down by bottom of O'Connell Street. And I went, because I grew up hearing that that's where the best engagement rings were bought, because that's where my father bought my mother her engagement ring, and it was always pointed out to us that, the seat of all desire.
Maybe it wasn't that much different. I'm sure it wouldn't be that much different. I think if you really could, when people went to pawn shops to buy them, thereby
engagement ring. Another.
Yeah. Some people did, I think. But I think Joe Joyce gets the Dublin thing very well. But you still, no matter how well you know Dublin, you still would have to check or rewalk the area sometimes to imagine things. Maps are a great thing too, I think. The old maps, if you're writing something in the past in particular, not nowadays, they don't tend to be the same. But if you have a map of Dublin in 1913, another one in 1918, and maybe even one before that, and when you put it out, you see things. You see the orphanages here, and the sawmills is there, and the meat factory is, the sausage factory is here, and this is here. So if you look at that and you walk your character from one to the other, you see what they pass, you see what they smell, you can guess what they hear, so that gives you great scope to develop ideas and to make use of the location.
And you said the Liffey was the one constant thing.
Yeah, the only thing that changed is the smell. The Liffey doesn't seem to smell anymore. Like when I was a child, you'd hold your nose going by the Liffey, it'd be so smelly. It doesn't stink as much.
What have they done to it?
They've cleaned it up. Deodorant has gone everywhere. I don't know what they've done, but it doesn't stink the way it used to. It used to be rotten, absolutely rotten. So the smell.
I suppose, Christine, the other thing that changes is pre and post independence. The street names, Sackville Street is, is O'Connell Street, Rutland Street, Pearse Street, and the names of the stations. Amiens Street Station, Pearse Station, we now call Connolly. It's so the old maps can tell you.
Older people would sometimes keep, they wouldn't say, I don't think I've ever heard anyone saying Sackville Street, but I have heard people refer to the stations as they were, they just, it was just passed through the family as they were, they couldn't be bothered changing. But they did, you do see that. And you see a lot of, you see a lot on a map, I think. Get a lot of good ideas from a map.
Do you pore over maps? Do you have them framed?
Well, I have some framed. I've one of Belfast, an old one of Belfast and an old one of Dublin framed upstairs. And I use them in particular in the trilogy. And as you said, the highfalutin sounds, the trilogy. It sounds like a brilliant idea when you're a writer. I think, shit, I have to do it now. But no, what happened was, my plan was the very first book I wrote was called The Dancer. And my plan was to kind of take a look at my grandfather. And not just him, I was very interested in that era in Dublin. There is something about the early years of the last century. And the early 1900s, and when you'd see old photographs of Dublin, I love them. I love looking at them and guessing about the people and the history that went on, and just even the ordinary day-to-day living fascinated me. But my grandfather came from a sort of what they used to call the merchant classes, where they would, you know, be in sort of business. Like he was the youngest son and was regarded as the runt of the litter because he was quite small, and the rest of the men in the family were tall. And they were like, one fellow was a town councillor, and he owned a bottle factory, and he owned a pub, and they were kind of going on and they owned a coach business, and they were on the way up, and then TB just struck the whole lot of them down except for the runt of the litter. He was the only one left. And at that stage, he was only a young man, he was about 18. He used to dance. He used to be a dancer, a soft shoe shuffling.
What kind of dancing?
Yeah. Soft shoe shuffling. Yeah. Put salt on the stage. He put salt on the stage and on the Olympia Theatre, which was called the Empire Theatre then, in James Street. And he loved that. That's all he wanted to do. And write poetry. He used to write poems. And of course, there was no man then to run the business. So sisters were all still alive, and but they couldn't. They wouldn't go in. It wouldn't be respectable for them to go into business. So they gave the businesses to him, and he learned how to drink. And he just basically very quickly developed a problem with drink and lost everything. So he kind of fascinated me, how you go from that and what happens when you take somebody away from their natural inclination, which was him to be a dancer and to love music. He was very knowledgeable about opera and music and all that kind of stuff. And to take him away from that and put him into business, which he clearly was not suited for. And that was just a starting point, though. I wasn't really all that much interested in him. I was kind of interested in the family, but not completely. But I was interested in the time. But what I had was the first sentence. All he ever wanted to do was sprinkle salt on a stage and listen to his feet shuffle through it. So that was kind of the first sentence. And I got the maps, and I did my sort of my research and got interested in the whole idea of theatrical people around. And I love books that are set in the theatre. Like I love Joseph O'Connor's but the Ghostlight and the
latest one about Bram Stoker.
Yeah, I love that. It's the whole thing about the latest one about Shadowlands. Yeah, sorry, I missed. And Michelle Forbes' Ghostlight and all those. I love those kind of ones that go back, especially to the theatre, and to go back to that period of time. So that's what I did with that. And I really used the city. I really, really used the maps, you know, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without those. And Belfast too then. So anyway, I got to the end of the story thinking I would look at his whole life, and he was still only 19 at this point. So I thought, what am I going to do? I have to say I'm going to write another one. So then I wrote another one, and we got through his whole life in 3 books. So it was a trilogy.
Fictionalized, though, I presume, yes?
Fictionalized, a lot of change. But some things I kept, you know. Like, for example, my father worked, and my uncle worked in Harland and Wolff during the war. And my father went up on forged papers to say he was older than he was, and they worked in Harland and Wolff. And my father always said that was where he really learned to gamble. Was in, like, his own father was a gambler. It's a kind of a thing they pass on with horses. But in Harland and Wolff, the poker, the card games, the poker, all that kind of stuff. So he was there during the Blitz. And this is something you know, these stories your parents tell you, but you don't really listen. You're saying, yeah, whatever, you know. But then suddenly you really want to hear. So he was alive when The Dancer was published, and I was writing The Gambler when he died. But the Blitz, he had told me a bit about it, and I got a bit of information about it, but I got really, really interested in it then. You know, I went to Belfast. So I needed to recreate that world of Belfast during the war. You know, and a lot of people don't even realise how badly bombed it was, and how the death and the awful destruction that went on. You know, we always think of Belfast. If we think of any violence up there, we always think of it was might have been localised violence, but this is something different entirely.
And did you go and walk around there too to get a feel for it?
Yeah, I walked around and got some great books and great help in the Linen Hall. I went to the libraries and the Linen Hall Library and different libraries, and spent time up there. And which I really have to say I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed those times. We go up for a few days at a time. And I got a terrific book. I went into Waterstones looking, because you wouldn't find those books down here in Waterstones, even though we had Waterstones. You wouldn't find local memoirs about Belfast, or, you know, one called Bodies in the Backyard, and another one, I can't remember, all different ones. I have them inside. But I was from Waterstones, there was a book that I came across, and it said that they had consulted another book. And I asked the guy, and he said, we don't have it, it's out of print. But there's a guy called David Hammond. He works here. This is where his office is. Go around and see him. So I went around to see him, and he was a wonderful fellow. Do you know David Hammond? He died a few years ago. Great friend of Seamus Heaney's, as it turned out. But he gave me this brilliant book called Nail Boots. And these were nicknames that they called each other. I can't remember exactly what it was. But in that book, there's all these photographs. And I'm convinced one of the photographs is of my father as a young man. I always look at him and say, that's my father. I know it is, you know, even though, you know, he was well into his 30s when I was born. He was coming up to 40, I think. But anyway, those kind of things helped, you know, to get the idea of the location in it.
Yeah. I mean, you're touching on something else, though, which is the stories people tell you, neighbours and so forth. I mean, when you talk about Belfast during the war, we had a neighbour who was from Belfast originally, and she said, well, she was never let walk home from work on her own during wartime because there were American GIs there.
Yeah, this brilliant book. I got this brilliant booklet called, and it's something that, you know, we could think about nowadays, but when people go to live in different countries. But this was a booklet that was passed on. Every GI who came to America was given this book, and they had to read it, and it gave them tips about how to get along with the locals. And one of the things was, you don't leave your bankroll on the table, meaning there are wad of notes on the counter when you go into a bar. And because these people don't have much money, and they don't believe in, even if they did, they don't believe in showing off what they have. They don't tell. So doing this, you don't do that. Don't cut in on a dance. That's considered rude. It never call to the house. When you call to the house, always call after a meal, because they would give you the last slice of bread that they have, you know. And if you're going to ask their daughter out for a date, be prepared to marry her. Be prepared to behave honourably, you know, this kind of thing. So they give all these tips about how you behave and how not to offend the locals, which I think is really funny. I actually gave it to John Montagu. I must ask Elizabeth, has he got it? I'd love it back, actually, to look at it. But anyway, that was great. I got a lot of tips about that, about the way, you know, these American soldiers came in to Belfast, and suddenly the local lads looked like nothing at all. They were very glamorous, you know. Yeah.
I know.
Lines up.
So, we've had a question in, Christine, apropos place. It's from Catherine in DLR Lexicon, and she says, has being confined to a room of your own been invigorating or exhausting? And has it been difficult to travel? Has it been difficult not to travel, considering so many of your books are set abroad? Good question.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad I did so much traveling when I did, because who knows what it's going to be like in the future, you know? To answer this, one thing I am glad of, I'm glad we didn't downsize, which is something we have been talking about, because our children don't live at home anymore. But now you can pack your bag and baggage if you want, meaning the way your teacher would tell you, I can pack my laptop and I can move into another room if I need to. And I can go for a little walk around the garden if I need to. And I can walk around the neighbourhood, and that's about it. No, I don't think I've either been invigorated or exhausted by it, to be honest. One thing that I have done, though, is that I have made myself a reading corner where I like to sit and read for an hour every day, and nothing disturbs that. And I do that after my day's work and before, say, the evening starts. I like to sit and I like to order books from book shops. And then when they come in, I find it very exciting when the book arrives, and I have a little pile of books to read. I may never read them all, but I still have them. They're ready to go. And that makes me feel better somehow. I always get comfort in books, I think. You know?
Yeah, there's nothing like a book. It's like a little spaceship that takes you into another, to other planets.
Yeah. And when I was writing the Narrow Land, it was a line that I put into it, that because I felt it myself, that Edward Hopper used to get up very early in the morning to read, and he said it's like being a fly on the wall at someone else's party, and that's how I feel it is. You're like a fly on the wall in someone else's life, when you're reading it. And so I've been doing a lot of reading, and that has helped me. That sort of, I've made it part of my routine, my daily routine, which helps.
Do you have a favourite book set in Dublin?
Well, I really, of mine, you mean, or anybody's?
Anybody's. But it can be one of yours if you like.
Well, no, I don't want to talk to myself all the time. I do think A Star Called Henry is quite a brilliant book set in Dublin. It really is wonderful. But of course, I'm going to say Ulysses is my favourite ever set in Dublin. And because for me, it just, no matter how many times I read it, and there are still areas of it I struggle in, I don't mind them. I don't mind that though. I just keep moving on, and I just love it. I think it's a great book. And I think it was worth all the pain and effort that Joyce had to go through to write the book. And that will always be my favourite Dublin book, I think. I like other ones too, though, I don't want to be.
Why? What is it about Ulysses?
It's just the essence of Dublin. It's the essence of the people in it. It's also because I feel a little bit grateful to it in a way, because when I started to write, or started to guess that I might like to write, but you don't have a clue about, when you're doing it, where to go, where to begin, or what to do. There were two books that really inspired me, and one was Ulysses, and the other one was Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And both of them, what I loved about them, and we'll take Leopold Bloom, seeing as we're talking about Dublin, was that when you were in Leopold Bloom's head, you were inside his head, and he'd walk along the street, you were seeing what he saw. You were a camera inside his head, and you could hear what he heard, and you could think, you could see and be part of his thoughts. Now, he might stop on the street to talk to somebody, but they didn't know what he was thinking, but you did. You're thinking, oh my God, I'm inside his head. And I remember thinking, I knew I wasn't by any means being ambitious enough to think that I was going to write the likes of Mrs. Dalloway or Leopold Bloom, but I wanted, when and if I started to write, I said to myself, I want to do that. I want to be inside the character's head, see only what they see, feel only what they feel, hear only what they hear. And that's the way I want to write.
Okay.
So that's what I try to do.
Just on this sense of this question of place, I'm looking at another One City, One Book choice from previous year, Dracula by Bram Stoker. We mentioned it earlier. Because it's not actually set in Dublin, although he is a Dublin writer. And yet there are things that are very recognisable for us in it. Here, I want to show you this. This book, Dracula's Guest, was also published, and the publisher, it's short stories, including an extract from Dracula that didn't make the final cut, but it says, on the 14th of September 1927, at a performance of the play Dracula, when each member of the audience opened his or her mystery package on their seat, they found not only a copy of this book, but inside the book's cover, a black bat powered by elastic, which flew out of the book when it was opened. Now, how is that?
I would have a heart if that happened. Oh my God, no. Brilliant.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, I mean, sometimes the place isn't all it appears to be.
In what sense?
Follow me. Well, Dracula's not set in Ireland, and yet there are recognisable things. I mean, perhaps the effect of the famine, for example, and the emaciated people. But also maybe this, I was thinking of it when you were talking about Dublin's historicity and these old, crowded, teeming, narrow streets. Dracula drawn to a teeming location.
The cathedrals, Tatty
Stoker makes it London, but
yeah. Well, I think every writer, I'm sure you'll agree with me probably, Martina, there, that things that we pick up when we're a child and when we're young, streets we walk in and places that we've been to and things we hear, it all stays within the mind somehow, and it comes out in the most strange ways, and at least when you sometimes you don't expect it, and something will come out that seems to have nothing to do with what you're writing, but yet suddenly can become very relevant. So I imagine with Bram Stoker was things that he saw and he ingested as a child, or as a young person when he was in Dublin, maybe came to him later and just found its way into his novels. Would you think? Maybe?
Possibly, and I mean, it's the same with Edna O'Brien and the Country Girls trilogy, last year's One City, One Book choice, which you have a great sense of place in them, of the big old house, clearly one of the big houses that the family has, or a substantial property, a bit isolated and deserted, and these young girls are mad for some crack and some life.
Yeah. And then they go to Dublin and they make use of Dublin while they're there. And a difference, what I liked about that too is it was a part of Dublin that she obviously knew very well, but we don't read that much about, about the north, around the north side of the city and different. I found that very, in the trilogy itself, in the second part of it, which is the girl with the green eyes. It's the second one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
When she goes and she has the affair with the smart, she really made use of Dublin, and then she goes to Grafton Street and Bewley's, and you could get, and they were all things that I remembered as well. That even, they've only started to change. I mean, Bewley's is kind of still there, you could say, I suppose, but that essence of the old Bewley's, that's only gone maybe 20 years as well, is it? About 20 years.
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah.
But so it is something that it's always enjoyable to recognise places.
So some places become interchangeable with the city where they're located. I mean, when I first came to Dublin as an 18-year-old to go to college, one of the first places I went to was Bewley's, because I thought I have to experience Dublin. I went to Bewley's for a cherry bun because I'd read that's what you do.
Yeah, and the coffee. Yeah, Bewley's is great. It was terrific. Yeah. And the things, as you say, you can take things. Mary Morrissey, her one, The Pretender, a novel that she wrote. I remember hearing her give a talk in the Arts Club one time, and she was talking about The Pretender. Is just in case anybody needs to be reminded, it's the story of the Russian royal family and Anastasia, the girl that may or may not have survived. And it looks at that. But she to put things in, I think there was something about, now it's a long time since I read it, maybe a factory or somebody transporting huge bales of something from one part to another. And what she did was she used the offices of the Irish Times in her head to...
Really?
That's what she transports them to Russia, to a completely different function. But she thought the noise would be the same, and the machinery, the sound of the machinery and the movement. And it worked really well. And she thought to herself, I'll change it later. I'll keep going while I'm, on a roll, and I'll change it later if I need to be. But she was perfectly right when she actually looked into it, which is interesting.
I mean, when you speak about the Times building, I'm thinking of the clocks as well around Dublin become emblematic of the city. There was one above the old Irish Independent building in Middle Abbey Street.
Yeah, I used
the meeting on the clock at Cleary's.
Yeah, I've only just finished writing something about that, actually, about the clock at Cleary's, A Christmas Story. But there was a book called The Clocks of Dublin that I came across in Ballyfermot Library. And I used it in my second novel, The Gambler, about somebody who gets a job, the dancer's son, you know, as his family grow up, and he's a clever fella, and he wants to, do better and go on, but he can't. He has to get a job. He has to leave school and get a job, and he ends up working as a solicitor's clerk. And Dublin becomes a city of clocks. And he goes from clock to clock, and that's how he hates his job, how he puts in its days. So it's kind of buckety stairs and clocks, and all the different clocks. So I became very knowledgeable about clocks for a while I
Can you fix them?
No. It is true, the clocks are still part of it, but I'm sure some of them are gone. Or sometimes the shop changes function and the little clock stays in the window or something.
Oh, yeah. This idea of us all reading the same book, obviously we didn't do it in the month of April, but it is a fantastic initiative because it does send you to books that you perhaps might have read years ago or always intended to read that's just out, but it does nudge you along.
It does, I think, and I think it makes it so, especially in a time like now, it sort of gives you a connection with other people when you're reading the same book and when you're discussing the same book. And I think it's worked particularly well for COVID, funnily enough. When I thought when COVID-19 happened, I thought, well, that's it. That's the end of anything to do with one city, one book now. But funnily enough, it's become in its own way a very successful year for Tatty and for the whole celebration of one city, one book. I think it's worked very well. Yeah.
And for the reading. Well, speaking of reading, Christine, do you have something you could read to us?
Yeah, I'm going to read two short pieces because we're talking about location, and I think it's interesting the way location changes over the years, but it's still the same location. And this very short paragraph, we'll go to the maestro himself from Ulysses. And this is from Aeolus. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's the newspaper section. And it's only one short paragraph. And it is at what it was like around Nelson's Pillar, which is no longer there on the top of O'Connell Street. So it's sort of headlined here. I won't go into all the details about it, but anyway, this is Ulysses by James Joyce. In the heart of the Hibernian metropolis, before Nelson's Pillar, trams slowed, shunted, changed trolley, started for Blackrock, Kingston and Dalkey, Clonskee, Rathgar and Terranure, Palmerston Park and Upper Rathmines, Sandymount, Green Rathmines, Ringsend and Sandymount Tower, Harold's Cross. The Horse Dublin United Tramway Company's timekeeper bawled them off. Rathgar and Terranure! Come on, Sandymount Green! Right and left, parallel clanging, ringing a double-decker and a single-deck moved from the railhead, swerved to the down line, glided parallel. Start! Palmerston Park! So that's the little extract from Ulysses. Okay. And one of the reasons I picked that as well is because Dublin, the areas in Dublin have such lovely, funny names, like where are you going to come across a name like Dolphin's Barn and all the kind of strange names. Name checks sometimes it's as easy as that. You just name check the Dublin names. But it also gives that idea of a city and what it's like and the life around it and around the pillar. So now we're going to go to 2010, where I picked a short paragraph from The Cold Eye of Heaven, from my own novel, The Cold Eye of Heaven. And this is in the second chapter, when the character Farley knows, I mentioned the shoe already, he knows that he had to get a shoe fixed and collect a suit, but he's in town, he's getting funny headaches all day, and he's getting little lights in his eyes and all this, and he's not feeling the best at all. So anyway, it's 2010. He keeps losing moments. It's like they're falling out of a hole in his pocket. The Cleary's bag is back under his arm, the shape of a shoe through its skin. He pulls the shoe out. The unblemished surface of a new blank sole looks up at him, lightly tan in colour, a perfect archway of minute and pristine nails. yet he can't for the life of him remember collecting it. Was the girl in the red coat outside the pub then or before? Were the taxi men eyeing him hungrily? Did someone ask him if he was all right? And when did he remember that Jackie was his brother? And now here he is, standing in the island in O'Connell Street, looking up at the glint of a giant needle that used to be Nelson's pillar. And thinking about the junkies again, and trying to pull the two ends of the same idea together, the junkies and the giant needle. And staring up at the needle and imagining himself on the bus, the wall of the park on one side, the scrag end of the Liffey on the other. And the next thing is he is on the bus and crossing the river to turn into Parkgate Street, wondering how he got from staring up at the needle to here. Splinters of light in his eyes again, and a huge cruise ship rises before him. It takes a moment to grasp it. That's right, the new Criminal Courts building, a big belly full of glass. The falling sun spitting all over it. Barristers are outside, flapping like crows on its steps. So that's Farley.
And that was the inimitable Christine Dwyer Hickey. Thank you for joining us for Laoghaire-Rathdown Library's Dublin One City, One Book series of talks. DLR Libraries will ensure these recordings are made available in case you've missed any of them, so do check back. Keep an eye out also for further information on next year's choice for One City, One Book, and that's available on www.dublinoncityoneBook.ie. Fingers and toes crossed that we get to do this meeting in person at events next year. Until then, keep reading. You know you want to.